Today, the topic is going to be about reimagining ministry. I don't know if you're like me, but it's been an incredibly painful, difficult, bewildering time. And I think oftentimes as a pastor, I've felt stuck and I've wondered, is it time to leave? Is it time to press on? What are ways that we can reimagine things? And so I invited some friends just to have this conversation around what would it look like for us to reimagine ministry, and then to just also ask the questions like, what are you thinking and seeing, and when is it time to stay or leave, and what are some possibilities there are for each one of us as we think about God's kingdom. Now, here's the thing. I've read the scriptures, and as far as I know, in the end, God is on the throne, and his ways are perfect and just, and he's going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish in the world around us. And so in many ways, I need to continue to come back to that. And so in the midst of that, really the conversation today was really a hope for us to have some freedom as we go about discerning, like, what's our part then in that story that God is writing, and to really give us the kind of freedom that hopefully we as pastors and ministry leaders want and need in a time that's been really bewildering. So the first friend that I'd like to introduce is my friend Laura Hairston. And Laura she's someone who's got multiple hustles going on. Well, she's a wife and mother, so she does that. She's got multiple different jobs and roles, whether it's been a nonprofit or for-profit. She's also been finished her MBA as well. So she's someone who just has some incredible capacity. And Laura has been someone who is someone that I really, really respect and admire. And I've asked Laura, I would love for you just to share your story, and maybe even, why don't we just start with your story, and then we can talk more about just the ways that you've reimagined ministry. So Laura, I'd love to hear more from you.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Actually, when you were talking about, like, should I stay in ministry? Should I? I think in like music, I always have like a song that comes in my head, and I was thinking that, like, should I stay or should I go? I don't know why I felt like I needed to say that, but like it just stuck. So now I can like float away. But yeah, I definitely think we're in that space. But thanks for having me, Drew. So my name is Laura. I'm married to, his name is Ryan Hairston, and we have 3 girls, 14, 12, and 6. And we live on the Upper Side. We moved from Texas, actually, about 4 years ago to the city, and I love it. I think we'll be here forever. Definitely a big change, but has been we actually, Drew and I and Sarah Bournes were on a webinar for Expo earlier on just Enneagram and rule of life and how that has all shaped us. And coming to New York has actually been very life-giving for me. I'm an Enneagram 1. And I want to also say that because it will, it kind of takes shape into where I'm in this space right now. That's not so easy. So my husband and I used to lead a nonprofit. It was called Forge America. They're still there. But just a mission training network, really helping equip and train everyday people to live as missionaries in the places that they live, work, and play. And so everyday people being able to say, what does it look like in the space that I work to see myself as sent by God into that space to be good news, to partner with God and be on mission, to contextualize the gospel, and to really alert others to Jesus, and just help them, equip them on how to do that. So I am now, just finished my MBA, hallelujah. I'm so grateful, but it was definitely a difficult several years. And now I am working part-time with Drew and the Hope Network, but starting this missional church network. And what I want to just say about that is what we're trying to do is there are people in the city that are leading house churches that are reaching unreached people groups. I know Ray and Elizabeth are on here with Kaleidoscope and saying, what does it look like for us to be the good news of Jesus, and help alert people to Jesus in this LGBTQ space. And I love what they're doing. And then there's Craig Fee's leading house churches in Queens. And so there's different missional efforts and initiatives. Young Life is very missional and incarnational. And my heartbeat is to say, can we create a space that we can, one, connect together, we can convene together to say, what's working, what's not, what are you noticing? Can we be a space of R&D, I think, almost in the city, to just discover together what the church could be in multiple expressions? And I really just have a heart to see collaborative efforts in the city and to see God's kingdom come through the big C church, and which means traditional Sunday morning church, but also what we're doing as well. And I really, I want to say that because I know in the past it's kind of been like, oh, you do missional, oh, we do Sunday morning, oh, and I'm tired of it, to be quite frank. I just want to see how can we learn from one another. And so what we're trying to do is just to say, can we be, again, this R&D, a space of discovery to reimagine. And the reason I say that that is difficult for me as an Enneagram 1 is I like structure. I like my systems. I like my boxes. I want to be able to just go, this is exactly what church looks like, and this is exactly what I'm going to do. And the mess is, but I think that God has called me right now into a different space. And so as we are all reimagining, and COVID definitely exposed so much into our systems and even just to what we feel called to, as Drew mentioned, they're calling it the great, resignation. And I think that some of that is because we've had space to pause and to say, am I doing this because I really want to? Like, why am I in ministry? Why am I doing this? And so for quite frankly, I mean, my husband decided during all of this, he's now in corporate America, and did that about 4 months ago. And it has changed our rhythms a ton. But it's also been good because it's given me, I think, an opportunity to see now, like, what a lot of New York families are living with, of working so much. And so sometimes I think, coming Sunday mornings is a bit like exhausting, to think that they just want to chill out on the weekends with their families or their friends. And so I'm just in this space of discovery, I think, to go, like, especially on the Upper East Side, what could church look like? So something that I've really tried to do, if you've read anything on Adam Grant, he talks about these, and I think it's in Think Again, but talks about these 4 modes of thinking. And so he said, we either come in as a pastor. So what he says in that space is we're right, and we're trying to get everybody to be right with us. Like, we know the right way. There's the politician that's just trying to win people over. There's the prosecutor that is trying to prove that someone is wrong. But he said, what if we could come into spaces as scientists, developing a hypothesis that it's like, I think this is it, and being willing to say, we may be wrong about something, or maybe we are right. And so I feel like this whole several years has given us an opportunity to almost we've unraveled a bit, and how we had to really wrestle with whether it's calling, whether it's why we do church the way that we do it, why we've said yes to certain things. I mean, it's given us that space to pause, and then to go, okay, how do we continue to read Jesus ourselves and repent, and just to recenter, so that we can then develop some just practices and what are our priorities in this space of church. So the reason I'm having to use language around for myself, because I don't want to fail, and I don't want to come in as like, I'm we're right, and missional church is right. But just to say, can we have a space, a playing field to try some different things? And for some of us just to go out and say, like, how do we reach people in New York City? How can we so I feel like I'm kind of in like this scientist phase of learning and discovery. And so that's what I'm doing with Missional Church. And then I also work with a global organization called Movement Leaders Collective, where we're just really helping to work with Jesus movements around the world. I want to change and shift the tracks of history, kind of a lofty goal, but I'm executive director for that organization as well. Drew, what more do you want me to?
Thanks. Yeah. So I would love for you, if you could actually define. So here's basically what's happened, right? Like so many pastors are in this season where everything that we thought was important is kind of like, what is that really important? Right. Like, and most of us, when it comes to Sunday church, it's basically Sunday church. It's come to the gathering, we count how many people we have, we count the offerings, and then we have a kids ministry, worship, and all that stuff. Now, speaking as someone who leads a church like that, so I'm not even trying to discount that. What you guys are doing now, because you're someone who's co-vocational, right? You've got multiple different vocations. Your husband is now in the marketplace. So he's not working for a nonprofit, he's working, but you guys are still reimagining what church looks like. And you're doing it in a space, which is what you're calling this missional church initiative. And would just love to clarify, what does that look like? Like, what does that missional church initiative look like? Who are the people that comprise that? And for anyone who's maybe thinking or has become, maybe disillusioned might be too strong a word, but just kind of like, is there another way to do ministry than try to get as many people to show up on a Sunday or to watch my live stream on a Sunday or whatever those metrics might look like? And is there another way, whether it's getting a job in the marketplace and still being passionate for doing the work of mission? Is it starting a nonprofit? Is it, you mentioned house church. So that network that you're starting you're trying to start, can you just clarify what that network is? And like the types of people that are involved in this, and like how people could, get involved in something like that, if this more traditional way of doing church and going about church was to be reimagined.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I would say, just even about, the Sunday morning. I mean, if you've just received, I think it came out this week, Tim Keller's is like a second article on just the decline of evangelicalism. And, I think what's caused us originally to start kind of reimagining church was that none of our neighbors were attending church. And part of that was they work on Sunday mornings, or the rhythms of their life look different. So I felt like we had to come up with, if people can't come to that, like what are we offering, and can we actually do life with the people that we're alongside? Also, I think just probably 12 years ago, I had this paradigm shift of, actually, I could be a participant in God's mission in the world. And I grew up in church and I had never heard that. I was 28 years old at the time and didn't even have a non-Christian friend. We had worked in church. Our only relationships were those in the church walls. And so it was a massive paradigm shift for me that actually Jesus said, as the Father sent me, I am now sending you. And so what does it now look like for me to go into these spaces and to incarnate and to learn the rhythms and to learn the culture and the people, and what are the rhythms of their life? What makes their heartbeat? And how could I, if everybody is made in the image of God, how could I pull some of that out of them? So it started on a journey. And so really, what I would say about that is this missional church network right now, it's very new. So it's definitely not fully formed, but some of it right now is those that have already been doing this, that have a missional community. And what I would say about that, we've even started having we do have a gathering on the Upper East Side just once a month, a monthly dinner with those that are actually at Hope or have come through Hope. But we also do something on Tuesday night. And I was just actually talking, Ricky Ortiz is on here. He's on the Upper East Side. We were having this conversation the other day, but we've just said, what's one thing we already do as a family that we can start bringing, maybe Christians alongside in that space as well? Then we'll start bringing non-Christians. So for us, it's Taco Tuesday. So it's something that's already a part of a rhythm of our life. So what we do is we do Taco Tuesday. We have a few people come over. We've done some missional rhythms, and we use bells. If you've read Surprise the World by Michael Frost. So what we do is we say, who have you blessed this week? And who have you eaten with this week? What did you learn from them? What are you learning from Jesus? Have you listened to the Spirit? How are you leaning into the Spirit? And where did you join God and where did you miss God? So that's already a part of just an everyday rhythm of our week. And so we're trying to bring people into that space. So that's just, here's the deal. What I think more of these missional expressions are, though, they're smaller. They're not going to produce a bunch of resources. So again, that gets to the vocational thing. I can't, lean in and hope that will fully support me. And so, yeah, we've had to reimagine that. But here, I just feel like, for me, it's just been one of the most life-giving things, trying to bring my neighbors into a space that, whether they're Christian or not, that they could serve our neighborhood. But something, Ricky, they have a meta church here on the Upper East Side. And one thing they've started doing is just after their service, they go on family walks already, him and his wife and his daughter. So they've told people, hey, you can just join us on our walk. This is just come to share life with us. And he said already people were like, well, but that time doesn't work for me. And he's like, it's not a program. It is just a practice of our family that you can join in on. So again, I know the resource thing is different. Just the programs and the professionalism, and it does change and it shifts, and we have to navigate that. But I feel like the Missional Church Network, what we're trying to do is say our metrics, our rhythms, our key to success will look very different. And we still need some of those markers. We still need ways to help equip people to go from Bible study to more of a missional community. So when I say that, I mean that there's components of community mission and worship. So we still want to see that happen, but it's just less programmed. It's less led by a professional, and it's around practices.
Yeah. So Laura, I would love for you, if anyone's interested in finding out more about that, could you just drop an email in the chat just so people can contact you? Because it sounds like what you guys are doing is local, either it's house church expressions, right, with folks who are bivocational. I know you mentioned Elizabeth, Black, and Ray, who are leading Kaleidoscope, which is a new nonprofit that's reaching and serving a community here in the city. Like, that's one example of like this missional church network. You have an Upper East Side gathering. It sounds like Meta Church has very like markers of what these different forms of church look like. And you're really trying to convene so that people that are having similar conversations around, does church planning need to look a certain way? Does church leadership need to look a certain way? I know that you're helping people reimagine that so that people could really be embedded in communities, reaching the unchurched, and still partaking in communion and worship and all the stuff that more traditional churches do, but it's just in a reimagined way. So yeah. Thanks, Laura. We're actually going to shift the conversation now to two different friends who were actually former pastors in a vocational setting, who've actually transitioned out of their roles. And I would just love to hear their stories and even just how their lives have changed and what advice they would give and kind of what brought them to that discernment. And so the two friends are Guy Wasko and Richard Lee.
It's good to see you guys. Yeah, it's really just been, my journey is 20 years of pastoral ministry. The last part of it was here in New Jersey. And I made the transition out to a nonprofit about 7 years ago. And so, I don't think the story of my journey is comparable in the sense of maybe the felt needs that maybe some of the people on this call are feeling, of the stress and the overwhelming sort of pressure, especially during this COVID time. I think Guy may be able to speak more to that. But I do think that the journey that I took, I remember 7 years ago when basically my friend told me about this organization. I did some research and felt like, oh, this would be like a good opportunity for me to make a transition over to a nonprofit. And so, like, for me, the interesting thing was that I found was actually when I was leaving, I was feeling like, how could I ever leave the church? It's all I've ever done. It's all I've ever known. It's all I'm ever qualified for. And I really felt like when I got to this nonprofit, I was going to be exposed, that everyone was going to know, like, what is this guy doing here? He has no knowledge about any of this. And I actually found out that it was kind of the opposite, in that so much of the experience that I found in leading a church, so much of the experience of the conversations around leadership that are happening in Christian circles really do equip you to be, high contributors in these marketplace professions. And so, like, I mean, right off the bat, I would just say, like, be encouraged that you are more equipped than you may feel that you are, in if you choose to, sort of leave the vocational ministry behind and find your footing in these other places.
How would you respond to a pastor who feels stuck? What would you say?
I mean, if a pastor came to me and said they feel stuck, I would say, of course you do. Especially if you're a New York City pastor over these last 2 years, you've had to plant your church virtually, and then you had to replant a hybrid version, and like week to week, you don't know who's going to show up. Like, of course you are feeling this pressure, and of course everything feels more isolated. But of course you do also because you're a pastor, right? Like we've all been there in some ways, whether I think it's most pastors, either like half the pastors want to quit on Saturday night and the other half want to quit on Sunday night. Like, it's like this rhythm of dealing with stress and dealing with disappointment. I think it's part of the leadership burden that we have as pastors that we need to manage, that we need to be able to walk through. And I think that's some of what we need to sort of assume and carry as leaders of our churches. But I definitely think that we need to lean into those feelings, right? If we sort of avoid those feelings of feeling stuck, I feel like it will also ultimately lead to something that will either further discourage you or even disqualify you, if you're not actually like leaning into those feelings and actually processing them in a healthy way. Whether that leads to you staying or you leaving, I think it's a healthy habit for us to be able to confront those feelings.
Yeah, no, that's so good. And you having is it something that because you're still really related to the ministry world and talking to different pastors, so intimately what pastors are thinking and going through. I mean, how would, if I'm someone and I'm thinking, should I leave vocational ministry or pastoring? What would you say?
Well, I'll tell you a story. So when I was pastoring, this is many, many years ago, I found out that I was like reaching out to my mentors every December. And for me, I didn't realize this at the time, but for me, it was the month of December, the year end, that I was thinking of January, thinking of the vision, sermon series in January, rebooting ministries and all this stuff. And I was thinking, I just don't know if I have enough in me to do this another year. And it was a rhythm of sort of emotional rhythm that I was feeling. Like every December, I was feeling the most discouraged. And I remember reaching out to a mentor of mine, and basically I was asking him, can I leave? I was like begging him for permission to like, can I leave? Like, will I be okay? Will God be happy, with me? And for me, it was a very narrow focus. It was a very urgent decision. And that person's response to me was basically to remove that urgency from that question. And they basically said, whatever you do right now, whatever you do this month, I want you in ministry 10 years from now. Well, I was a little bit younger, so maybe he said 20 years. But I want to see you in ministry in 20 years because we know people who have been in ministry and are no longer in ministry, and without judgment, but saying like, if you want to stay in that vocational ministry, like make a decision that will extrapolating that decision out to 10 years from now and saying like, what decision would I make now if I were valuing the longevity of ministry. And what that did for me, Drew, was it released the pressure of every day. It released the pressure. Like, can I make it to Sunday? That was what I was feeling.
Wow.
And it just allowed me to say, okay, Sunday is just one of the Sundays over the next 10 years. And so it gave me the freedom to sort of see my future and my career in a way that wasn't like the pressure wasn't building, all throughout the week and sort of exploding on Sunday. Now, the reality is I ended up staying at that church for a few more years after that conversation and didn't end up leaving the pastoral ministry until many, many more years after that. And so, but that conversation has stuck with me to, really help kind of frame out that sort of decision that pastors are making. And the only other thing I would say about that is that what we define as vocational ministry, what we define as ministry is much broader, I think, than it was for me 20 years ago, right? I mean, when I first started ministry, it was like, I got to be at a pulpit and I got to be preaching. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, well, I could just be a staff pastor. And then you expand that to say, like, I don't actually need to be on staff at a church. Ministry is a calling for all Christians. Vocational ministry is not. And so if your vocation is getting in the way of your ministry, then you might need a break.
Wow. That's good, man. Yeah. And I think what I love about what you're saying is you're giving pastors first the freedom to just be like, hey, like there's other options. God's working and it's about finding the best fit. And can you say that last bit, that last sentence you said? If your vocation is getting in the way.
If your vocation is getting in the way of your ministry, it might be time for a break.
Wow. Love it, man. Hey, there's some questions coming in and I think people are giving some really helpful comments as well. And so we'll come back to you and Guy, because I think, both of you guys kind of have a similar set of stories or we'll see. Guy, now if it's working, okay.
It's good to see all of you guys and friends. I felt called to ministry at 12 years old and have been serving as a pastor in one form or another in the local church since about the late 1997, 98, around there. And most recently pastored a church in New York City that I planted with some friends about 12 years ago. And so what you don't know, and then so about a year ago, I transitioned out of that role and joined Team Full-Time with Compassion International, which is a ministry that seeks to release children from poverty around the world through Jesus' name and the local church. So that's what I get to do now full-time. And this conversation matters very much to me. And what you probably don't know from my story, unless we've had a chance to sit down and share a cup of coffee or something, is that for probably about the last 5 or 6 years, I had been thinking about shifting my role, my vocation. A friend came to me within the Trinity Grace system and family and said, hey, what about this other role where you could potentially serve all of the churches? And that got me thinking that maybe I don't want to be a church planter my whole life. I find myself to be more of a starter than somebody who manages well or, that kind of thing. And so that got me thinking. And so over the last couple of years, I've been trying to figure out, God, is this assignment still my assignment? It was an active conversation. Have any of you wrestled consistently with God about something? Anybody? Anybody wrestle with God about whether you're in the right role or in the right seat on the bus? And God keeps telling you the same thing. That happened for me over and over and over again for the last 4 or 5 years. Lord, please let me out of this assignment. Please give me permission to take a new role. Please let me hand this over to somebody else. And so that was a constant discernment and dialogue that I was having with Jesus. And every time until last August, the Lord's answer to me, as best I could discern it, Drew and friends, was, this is your assignment. I want you to continue to lead this church. And so I did. I didn't always want to, but like I said, but I did. And every time the Lord would say, this is still your assignment, I don't have a new one for you, my attitude and disposition and my energy would change from, I don't want to do this anymore, to obedience and faithfulness. Does that make sense? Like, God, this is what you've given to me, and I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep going. And so until last fall, when the Lord said, okay, I give you permission to at least explore these other conversations, or to explore what could be next. So then I had to go through a whole process of discernment, that a series of tools and questions that I've picked up along the way. Some from a life planning process that I went through in 2008 and am now certified to do as well. So anyway, that's a bit of like my history and journey and how I got here. And I would just say, Drew, like, this idea of calling and vocation, oftentimes I think for pastors, we get them, they're too intertwined. And so I would encourage anybody who's feeling stuck to take an assessment about where you feel stuck, where you've lost joy that maybe you had before. If I were sitting down at the table with you as a friend, I would ask you a series of questions like, knowing what you know about the job that you currently have, if the job was offered to you today, would you sign up for it? Would you apply for that job? And I think as we begin to ask some questions about ourselves, about our motivation, things begin to be revealed, right? So your calling is separate from your vocation. The second thing I would ask is, please don't stay in any role. Don't stay in your role simply because you have a fear that things will fall apart. That actually tells me a lot about the organization. It tells me a lot about the structure, the teammates, the people that you have around you, and your leadership. And I think that's pretty interesting. Sometimes we feel alone, like we're carrying the whole thing by ourselves, and it's because we actually are. Because we haven't, released or empowered. We haven't raised other people up, because we're trying to the structure is actually part of the problem. I also think I would ask questions about joy, like, where do you find the joy in your role, in your job? Where does your heart and passions align with your job description? Can you change some of those things? I would ask questions about, like, are there things that you can delegate and give away? And then begin to test. Can you take a break? Sabbaticals classically for pastors sometimes have like a bad reputation, right? Like you take a sabbatical, the pastor comes back and then they resign. And I think sometimes maybe we need to take a break before we need it. To good seasons of rest and breaks and refueling your soul,
Yeah.
So those are some of the thoughts that, again, my history, a little bit of my story, and then some of my thoughts.
Yeah. How has the transition been for you now, Guy? Do you feel?
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually been amazing. I feel free. I feel like sometimes as a pastor, especially over the last season, I felt like I was going into battle wearing somebody else's armor.
Wow.
And I knew I was being true. I knew I was being obedient to the Lord to do the thing that he asked me to do, to plant a church in the East Village. But there was a certain point where it just felt like I just felt uncomfortable, even in my own community. And that was just odd to me. I didn't think that's the way it was supposed to be. And so I needed to figure out a way to either like do that job differently, which I tried a few times, or get out of that specific job. And so since doing that, the few things that I'm actually good at, that I actually think I have raw core talent and skill for, I feel like I can actually contribute that in the specificity of my new job. So how am I doing? I love the job. I love the mission. I'm still pastoring, but I get to do it in a way that fits me, that's in alignment with me better. So I'm loving it. I'm also really supported really well. Again, the job is super specific. It's amazing to be on team in a very stable organization. Lots of change, of course, but also a very stable organization. So I don't know if you guys know this, but church planting is not exactly the most stable vocation. out there. So that's been really good. Oh, one other thing I will share with this group. I think there was a certain integrity thing for me too, friends, because at a certain point, two things. I began to change my mind about the effectiveness of certain models of church began to change. And so connected to Laura's conversation earlier on this call, the container of the way we were doing church began to make less and less sense to me. So it didn't feel like there was integrity for me to keep serving and leading through a system that I was asking a lot of questions about. Yeah. So I want to be really clear. I have no judgment against people who feel called to that expression of church. That's just not the thing that I felt like I could do. And then the other thing is just related to my ability to refuel my spiritual tank so that I felt like I had the character to lead a church the way that it was required. And I felt like I have the spiritual maturity and character to do my job now, to sit and be a friend, to care and listen to a pastor talk about mission and how they want to extend mission and justice and God's kindness to the world, especially to the least of these. I didn't feel like I had the character and the internal spiritual maturity to continue to lead a church the way that the people in the community in that church needed and demanded and were like expectant, should expect from their pastor. Yeah. So I share that just in transparency with you guys. And I think that's part of the reason why I think too, that we need a break, because sometimes especially in seasons of tremendous change and pressure, like we've just been through, like we're still in, it requires a deeper spirituality. And it's when we're in the middle of the fight is not the time to dig a deeper well. Mm-hmm. When you're in the middle of the fight, you need to be able to go to your resources that you already have, that you've developed over time, that will sustain you. I realized that at a certain point, I didn't have the deep enough well to keep going, to lead the way that I think I needed to, and that the community deserved.
Wow. Man, that's good, Guy. Hey, I'm bringing Rich back to the conversation here. We've had a couple of questions. We just love to get your insight on, some of these things. I mean, what's really cool is that both of you guys are still living into your God-given callings, destiny, and mission for the kingdom of God, which is what you were doing in vocational church ministry. Now you're just doing it in a different reimagined way. As Laura and Ryan were talking, or Ryan didn't say anything, but Laura was speaking about Ryan going into this vocation, things like that. So what do you, I saw Dr. J. Feld, he commented about shame, the shame that's involved with, as a pastor, like even bringing up the idea, especially in a time like COVID, because it's like, I'm supposed to be the strong one, and I'm supposed to, I don't know if maybe we can start with you, Rich. Like, well, how would you, like, creating safe spaces, like what should pastors do if there is that kind of shame where we're not able to have those open conversations?
Yeah, a Korean asking a Korean about shame. That's like meta. Yeah, it's real. It is totally real. I think, I saw Elizabeth's question about, like, how do you deal with the disapproval and the disappointment? So I'm going to say three things real quick. The first is, and this may hurt, is that I don't think any of us are that special. When I left my church 7 years ago, I was like, where in the world will they ever find another pastor like me? And the vast majority of them found one pretty quickly. And actually, a lot of them ended up leaving the church, that church community, but they, for the most part, have landed in good and helpful places, and probably in some ways have been working on spiritual muscles that I wasn't good at developing anyway. And so I'm not that special, though I thought I was. And they will find, people. I think our main concern, I'll say this, if our concern is about the Christians in our churches, we may have the wrong focus in our church communities and our vision. It really should be about who is going to reach the neighborhood if I leave the vision of this church. But hopefully that's the vision that will continue in the church. Second thing I would say is we are meant to pastor and to lead people in all aspects of our life, how we live and how we talk and how we dream and how we, eat and drink and all these things. And I think we can pastor people so well in how we leave and how we make hard decisions. I think it's actually an opportunity for us to be able to pastor our people so well if we just talk about how, and we show them how we leave well and how we make these hard decisions as followers of Christ. The third thing is just a very pro tip. I have a pet peeve about the language that we use when we decide to leave. And so many pastors have said, God has called me out of, pastoring this church, which, may well be the case. But I feel like a lot of pastors use that language because I don't want your disappointment. So I'll let you be disappointed in God. And I think that does a disservice to the ministry after you leave. And when I left, I wrote it out because I didn't want to mess it up. And I said, my wife and I have decided to leave this church or this position at this church. And that's just like a pro tip of like, don't bring God's disappointment, the disappointment in God into sort of like your announcement and things like that, because, you want to be able to sort of own that decision and being able to leave well.
Wow. That's good, man. Yeah. Guy, how about you, man?
Yeah, to the issue of shame, I would say, like, while I love and I'm in a good place, I'd be lying to say I didn't that I wouldn't struggle, or I don't struggle every once in a while with thinking, well, what does that person think of me? Or did I make the right decision? Or did I screw up? Should I have stayed in longer? That happens. Those questions do come. And for me, two things help me when that happens. Number one, going back to the idea of understanding my calling, my purpose and meaning in this world, that I'm meant to contribute, separate from my vocation. So I can wear a lot of different team jerseys as long as I know that jersey on that team still allows me to fulfill my calling. So I as long as I know that, that's really helpful in dealing with shame. And the second thing that helps me, Dr. J, I love this question, is understanding and knowing my identity in Christ, that God loves me before I ever do a single thing. Before I ever produce something, regardless of what title or role I have. There's this deep sense of rootedness, that I have every spiritual blessing, and that promise in Ephesians 1 is not connected to a title or a role or a salary or where I live. So those, for me, I'm not sure how therapeutic they are, Dr. J, but and I certainly would love to hear how you would answer that question. But that's some, kind of part of the way that I think about it. Two other things that I thought, well, one other thing especially that I thought of, Drew, back to this sort of the previous part of our conversation, if somebody feels stuck. If someone came to you as a pastor, you're the pastor, they called you for coffee, you're meeting in your favorite shop in your neighborhood, and they're explaining to you how you feel about their job, the stress, the pressure, the anxiety, the sleeplessness, the demands, all of that. They're explaining to you the way that you feel now.
Wow.
What advice would you give them? What would you say to somebody who's a banker or works at McDonald's or is the barista at that very coffee shop about purpose and calling and destiny and job? And I think one of the things I would say to someone, if I were in this made up conversation, is I would say, especially spiritually speaking, does God expect us to be mentally, emotionally, and spiritually less healthy because of the job we have? Is it the expectation that we would somehow be, more in a worse off position because of the role? That if the role is actually causing that, if we've done everything else in our power to make it healthy, and it's not, that's still the residual effect. We wouldn't give that kind of advice to somebody in those roles. So why, in my mind, why is it okay for us as pastors to take on that kind of abuse? Why is it okay for the church, the role, to do that to us or to others? And I'm not saying I have a great answer for all of this. I just think like we need to be honest with the damage that's being done our bodies keeping score, our families that are paying the price. And I'm not saying we all need cushy jobs and there's never going to be anything hard and we shouldn't take a stand. And I'm not saying any of that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying weigh all of this in together.
Yeah. You know, and knowing you both, like you both are some of the most like resilient pastoral, like you guys are in it, you know, and I really admire you guys just sharing this. Hey, we're we're at the end of our time. We didn't get to the question. Sorry about that, Elizabeth, about like communities and like us staying in the communities that we're part of. And when our work is mixed in with those, how to navigate that. And because we're at the end of the time, I just want to respect everyone's time. Sorry, we didn't get to that question. Maybe we can have another conversation around this. I know that so much, I think you guys brought up so many wonderful points. And by the way, Laura would have been in part of this panel Q&A as well, except she had to leave early. So just some next steps. Guy, you mentioned there's a life planning process. Can you just give a quick, can you just tell us what that is and how people could get access to that with you?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of organizations that have very similar products, for lack of a better word to use there. The Patterson Center is one of them, and that's the life planning process that I've been through and I'm certified in. Will Mancini and Dave Rhodes have one called something really awesome. I can't remember the exact title of it, but look up those guys. And then Donald Miller has Story Brand and the stuff that he's doing. It's all very helpful. But for me, you can reach out to me, guywasko@gmail.com. Chanel is on this call as well. She's an awesome friend. She's also certified in the life planning stuff. So if you're a lady and you're interested in sort of exploring what this is, it's basically a 2-day facilitated guided conversation that looks back in your life to gain perspective, mind for meaning. And when we write a personal mission statement, vision statement, and then build a strategy so that you can live off the pages of your own story. And that, again, gives confidence and guidance and clarity and an actionable plan. So that's an investment that people can make in their own lives. And so that's one tool and resource. And then I will tell you, part of my story too, guys, is I gave Eugene Peterson, the pastor of all pastors, as every opportunity to keep me in the vocational pastor game. So every year I would reread Under the Unpredictable Plant, his story about Jonah. And anyway, I would just say that's an amazing book to read, and you should give that a look as well. But hopefully, Chanel, I'm on my little tiny sort of device here, so I can't see the chat section.
Yeah,
well,
she dropped it in the chat.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Chanel. And I'll send an email out to everyone with these resources in this website as well. So with Guy's contact, Chanel's contact around life planning. Rich, you mentioned too, like just a judgment-free zone for anyone who's wrestling with this. I mean, I don't know. Just can you end with those final thoughts?
I will say this, like, I bet you there are some people that are feeling like this is it. I have permission to leave. Like, starting, I'm going on, monster.com or whatever. And I would say, like, my heart in all of this is actually for you not to feel stuck and that you feel like you have no other options. But I think given the freedom to choose, I would love for so many of you to choose to stay and actually flourish in those in the roles that you find yourself in. So please hear, and I hope people didn't drop off the call that needed to hear this, which is that, like, it's not like we're saying get out and run when you can. What we're saying is you can leave whenever you want. There is options and it's fine. And there's life after this. And so that may actually motivate you to change, as it did me so many years ago. For those years. The one thing I would say is pastors feel like the conversation, uttering the words, I'm thinking about leaving my church, is actually the act of leaving their church. And it's not. And it's actually healthy for you to be able to talk about these things. And so I would choose someone on this call and reach out to them, reach out to someone, one of your friends, and just be able to have a judgment-free conversation to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Walk through this with me. I'd be happy to do that. If you want to email me, my email is guywasko@gmail.com. No, Drew will send me my email.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And I actually do. So I'm going on sabbatical this summer. So we do sabbatical, speaking about emotionally healthy and stuff. Like every sabbatical, I realize while it's a restful time, it's also a gut check moment for me of like, God, can I remove my ego from all the trappings of how my sense of identity and self-worth has been wrapped up into this church or ministry? Like, I realize I need the discipline of disengaging from that so that I can make a free decision, because I believe that's how God, as us being sons and daughters of a good dad, like, get to make those kinds of calls as we discern his voice. And so, guys, thanks so much.